Most people believed South Africa was about to become a massive graveyard. Experts already had the country's obituary ready for print. By 1994, the math pointed toward a racial bloodbath. For 50 years, a brutal system called Apartheid used the law to keep people separated by race. It was a legal machine that ran on state-sponsored hatred and violence. By the early 90s, the gears were finally grinding to a halt. Armed militias were stockpiling weapons for a final violent revolution. But as the world braced for the first explosion, a different voice emerged: Archbishop Desmond Tutu. He didn't demand a firing squad or a series of trials. Instead, the man in the purple robe proposed a trade that many viewed as a betrayal. The plan offered amnesty, total legal freedom to those who had committed atrocities. There was only one catch. Every killer had to stand in public and confess their crimes in vivid detail. It was a radical experiment in grace that defied human nature. How did this theology of mercy dismantle a nuclear-armed regime without a civil war? And what happens when the truth is the only price for freedom? We need to talk about what Desmond Tutu actually did. Political power shifted in 1948 when the National Party took control. Soon, these new leaders launched a social engineering project designed to last for centuries. Their ultimate goal was strict isolation between the races. To do this, the state legally classified every single person into 4 distinct groups: white, black, colored, and Indian. By law, the white minority was placed at the very top of the social pyramid. Officials treated families like chess pieces, moving them into specific zones. Millions of black South Africans were pushed into dry, barren homelands called Bantustans. These human beings were reduced to cheap labor instead of valued citizens. State control even reached inside the local classrooms. New rules intentionally limited what black students were allowed to learn. Lessons focused on manual labor rather than building a future. The engineers of this separation believed their wall was unbreakable. Yet every machine built on oppression eventually creates heat. That friction turned into a fire in March of 1960. Peaceful protesters in Sharpeville suddenly faced a wall of police gunfire. Bullet wounds in the backs of 69 victims proved they were fleeing. After that day, quiet resolutions were no longer an option. Fury erupted again in 1977 after Steve Biko died in police custody. By the mid-1980s, the nation functioned like a high-security prison. Amidst the rising violence, a different type of leader appeared. This man carried a message rather than a weapon. Nelson Mandela was the world's most famous prisoner. He spent 27 years behind bars for fighting the system. His release in 1990 marked the beginning of the end for apartheid. But as he walked free, the country was falling apart. Both sides had blood on their hands. State death squads had kidnapped and murdered thousands. Resistance fighters had also used bombs that took innocent lives. Mandela faced a choice between perfect justice and a total war. He called this dilemma the choice of justice with ashes. Avoiding a national fire required a partner who could speak to the soul. This was the moment the politician and the priest joined forces. Mandela handled the tanks, while Tutu handled the conscience of the people. Together, they helped design a law in 1995 to manage the transition. This created the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, with Tutu as chairman. He offered a trade for those who committed political crimes. Perpetrators received legal freedom in exchange for the full public truth. Trading the right to punish for the right to know was vital. Tutu believed that secrets were the foundation of the old machine. Pulling those secrets into the light was the only way to heal. By 1996, the Archbishop was ready to open the first public hearings. Archbishop Desmond Tutu was a priest who spent the 80s in the streets. Angry mobs and police often found him standing right in the middle. His purple robes acted like a shield for those being chased. When this small man began to speak, the crowds would grow silent. Tutu refused to use the language of war or hatred. Instead, he preached about a powerful concept called Ubuntu. It's an ancient African philosophy that translates to, "I am because we are." It suggests that our lives are tied together in a single invisible fabric. In this view, harming another person actually damages your own soul. Violence doesn't just break the victim, cruelty shatters the humanity of the person pulling the trigger. Tutu argued that even a hateful prison guard was still a human being. Because of this, searching for a spark of divine worth became his life's work. He believed every person was valuable, no matter what they had done. Ultimately, healing the social breach mattered more than taking an eye for an eye. Restoring the community was the only way to prevent a total national collapse. While most politicians wanted simple justice, Tutu wanted something much deeper, a spiritual cleaning of the country's conscience. It was a high-stakes gamble. The world waited to see if a country could truly survive on grace alone. Tutu sat at the front of the hall as the hearings began. He often wore his purple robes to remind everyone of the spiritual stakes. He made sure the victims finally had a place to speak. Amy Biehl's story became the ultimate test for Tutu's radical experiment. She was a 26-year-old American student living in Cape Town. In 1993, a mob attacked her car and killed her during a protest. 4 young men were eventually convicted of the brutal stoning and stabbing. These killers applied for amnesty, claiming the murder was a political act. Tutu watched as Amy's parents, Linda and Peter, stood to face them. While most people expected a demand for punishment, something else happened. Instead, Linda Biehl followed Tutu's lead. She chose to forgive. She decided that mercy was the only way to fill the void. Eventually, 2 of the killers found jobs at a foundation named for Amy. Tutu pointed to this as proof that mercy could transform a violent soldier. A theological idea had become a practical tool for survival. But even as the chair, Tutu couldn't make the process work for everyone. Tutu often wept openly while listening to the testimonies. He sat in silence as the transition was built on the backs of grieving families. In 1986, police killed 7 activists in Gugale 2. One mother, Cynthia Ngewu, chose to forgive the men involved. She told Tutu that she wanted to restore the humanity of the killers. But another mother, Natros Konile, had a much different experience. She sat before Tutu and spoke in broken, confusing thoughts. She described dreams of talking goats and being trapped under rocks. The trauma of her loss had shattered her ability to find peace. Journalists followed up with her long after the cameras were gone. She told them plainly that she did not forgive the killers. For Natros Konile, Tutu's trade of truth for freedom felt like a theft. A major flaw also emerged at the top of the National Party pyramid. Only the soldiers at the bottom came forward to confess their crimes. These trigger pullers were the only ones Tutu saw in his hearing room. Meanwhile, the senior politicians at the top often stayed silent. They used plausible deniability to claim they never gave specific orders. This left Tutu with a list of shooters, but very few masters. As the process closed, the nation was left with an unfinished history. South Africa remains a deeply flawed nation today. Poverty and inequality still weigh heavy on the people, but the country is not the graveyard the world predicted. Desmond Tutu passed away in 2021 at 90 years old. His legacy is a nation that chose words over weapons. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission did not heal every heart. Rather, it gave a broken people a way to live together. This process proved that truth is a stronger foundation than secrets. Tutu's faith was the engine behind every decision he made. He looked at the cross and saw a blueprint for a new world. Forgiveness was never meant to be a simple feeling. It was a practical architecture for human survival. This story remains a striking example of restorative justice. It proves that the hardest choice is often the only way toward peace. If a king could forgive his killers, then a nation could too.